Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. 2025 was a big year for Turkey. We saw major domestic developments like the March arrest of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, as well as the Kurdistan Workers' Party, aka PKK, agreeing to disarm in May after a decades-long struggle. On the foreign front, Turkey has built strong relations with the new government in Syria and played a role in the Gaza ceasefire talks. In this episode, we're doing a 2025 year in review for Turkey, with Al Monitor's correspondent in Ankara, Ezgi Akin. Listen as Ezgi provides key details on Turkey's position in Syria, the domestic situation facing the opposition and the PKK, the growing rivalry with Israel in the Eastern Mediterranean, and more. Hope you enjoy. Ezgi, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's great to be back here with you.
So, Ezgi, when I think about Turkey in 2025, I see a country that wasn't involved in a war like Iran and Israel or Gaza, wasn't hit with missiles like Qatar. It didn't have a major visit by Trump like the Gulf countries, but I still think it was a huge year for Turkey, including their role in the region and also domestically, in Syria and beyond. How would you characterize 2025 for Turkey, and what stood out to you the most?
Well, Adam, you have a point there. The foreign policy front was anything but quiet. And I can say that 2025 was really a year of sharp contrast for Turkey. For example, we had on one hand peace talks with PKK, and on the other hand, we have the imprisonment of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu and the ongoing crackdown on the main opposition CHP. So if we were to make a chronological list, it will go like this. What really set the tone for 2025 was the collapse of Bashar al-Assad regime in late 2024. That gave the year a surprisingly strong and even optimistic start for Ankara. Turkey had long backed the opposition forces that ultimately overthrew Assad, and as a result, it emerged as the single most influential foreign actor shaping Syria's transition. Then in March, in my opinion, the most consequential and long-term development at home was the imprisonment of İmamoğlu, one of President Erdogan's most serious political rivals. He was detained in March on corruption charges, a move that was widely seen as politically motivated. His arrest was followed by an unprecedented crackdown on the CHP, which is also the founding party of the Turkish Republic. And another historic moment came in May when the PKK announced it will disband and dissolve itself. This followed a renewed peace talks between Turkish authorities and the militant group's imprisoned leader Abdullah Öcalan, who has been serving a life sentence since 1999 at a Turkish prison. And if sustained, these peace talks could mark the formal end of one of the longest and deadliest conflicts in modern Turkish history. Finally, Gaza stood out as a key foreign policy front. As you know, Erdogan has long positioned himself as a champion of the Palestinian cause, which also resonates strongly with the Turkish public opinion. And in October, Turkey became a direct mediator in the peace process by signing President Trump's 20-point peace plan. We can break down each of these developments depending on where you would like to start. So just let me know which one you want to dive into first.
Yeah, there's a lot to get to. Like you said, many interesting things happened. I want to first talk about Syria. I mean, how does Turkey view these developments in Syria 1 year after Assad's fall? Obviously, that was a government that wasn't really strategically valuable for Turkey, now replaced with a government that's very friendly to Ankara. Is Turkey happy with Syria's trajectory till now?
Well, as you mentioned, in the immediate aftermath of Assad's fall, Turkey's view of Syria's trajectory has been cautiously optimistic. But I can say that that optimism has been dampened by two major sticking points: the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF, and Israeli posture inside Syria. Now, let's begin with the SDF. As we all know, it's the Pentagon's main partner in the fight against ISIS in Syria, and the group now controls large parts of northeast Syria. For Turkey, however, the SDF is essentially an extension of the PKK, the Kurdish militant group that fought the Turkish state for decades for Kurdish self-rule inside Turkey. That's why Ankara sees the SDF not as a local Syrian actor, but as a direct national security threat. Turkey's demands are straightforward. Ankara wants the SDF either fully integrated into the Syrian army with its fighters disbanded as an independent force, or its dismantlement entirely. Talks over integration between Damascus and the SDF have stalled throughout the year. Turkish officials have warned that their patience are running thin, and they have threatened military pressure if the SDF fails to comply with the March integration deal between Damascus and the Kurdish-led group. And by the way, the deadline of that deal will expire at the start of the new year. Then there is Israel. Following Assad's fall, Israel stepped up military operations in Syria, asserting control in the south. From Ankara's perspective, Israel favors a decentralized or fragmented Syria, which is the exact opposite what Turkey wants. Ankara fears that any form of Kurdish federalism in northeast Syria would undermine Turkey's own peace process at home, because Turkish officials equate the SDF directly with the PKK. And this clash of visions have fueled tensions between Turkey and Israel and complicated Ankara's hopes for a stable and unified post-Assad Syria. So is Turkey happy with Syria's trajectory? Not entirely, I can say. That said, there have been some encouraging developments as well. Topping them was the lifting of Western and US sanctions. The move was warmly welcomed in Ankara. This was something Turkish officials had actively lobbied for with their Western counterparts. Also, Shara made a landmark visit to the White House. This has also given a boost to efforts by the new transnational government in Damascus to consolidate its authority in the country.
So I understand the SDF issue in Syria is not resolved from Turkey's point of view or from people in Syria's point of view, but I have a question about the PKK within Turkey, because obviously we saw, some disarmament happen. This is kind of a direct question. Is 2025 the year the PKK-Turkey conflict ended within Turkey, in your view?
It may be a strong definition, but what I can say is that this year has definitely been a turning point in the 4-decade conflict between Turkey and Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PKK. The militant group has fought against Turkey for Kurdish self-rule inside the country since 1984 and is considered a terror outfit by Turkey, the United States, and the European Union. The peace process between Turkish authorities and the militant group made historic strides this year. Among them was Öcalan made a historic call in March, abandoning his goal for Kurdish self-rule inside the country. And he instructed his militant group to disarm and disband. And heeding Öcalan's call, the PKK in March announced a unilateral ceasefire, saying it would disarm and disband. And in November, a delegation from a Turkish parliamentary committee, which is tasked to draft a roadmap for the advancement of the peace talks, held an unprecedented meeting with Öcalan at a prison where he is held. This boosted Öcalan's legitimacy as an interlocutor in these talks. Following that meeting, the parliamentary committee is now working on drafting a roadmap. This roadmap is expected to include some sort of amnesty for PKK fighters, Uh, it's also expected to address some of the demands of Kurdish political movement in Turkey. For example, the release of thousands of Kurdish politicians and activists from prisons who were arrested or convicted on terror-related charges. Constitutional recognition of the Kurdish identity has also been a top demand. But going back, what we have mentioned before, the STF remains to be the most sticking issue in the ongoing peace process. The Kurdish-led group is an offshoot of the PKK in Ankara's view, and as long as it keeps its weapons, disarming of the PKK would amount to close to nothing. So the trajectory will largely be impacted by the ongoing talks between Damascus and the STF for the integration.
I want to shift back to the domestic situation. What is the state of domestic Turkish politics at the end of 2025, going into 2026? You mentioned the arrest of Imamoglu earlier. And also, are there any challenges remaining to Erdogan and his AKP?
Well, yes, without hesitation, the most consequential incident of the 2025 was imprisonment of Ekrem İmamoğlu, in my opinion. It's worth noting that it came after the 2024 local elections, when the main opposition delivered President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's ruling party its most serious electoral setback in 2 decades by winning major cities, emerging the largest party nationwide. İmamoğlu, who won Istanbul for a second term in 2024, has been widely seen one of Erdogan's main rivals. His detention marked a turning point. Mass protests erupted, the largest since 2013 in Turkey. Journalists were imprisoned, and a series of pro-opposition news channels were silenced. And İmamoğlu's imprisonment was followed by a jailing of more than 100 CHP officials and the removal of multiple main opposition mayors across the country. Government critics slammed the crackdown as a politically motivated, aimed at weakening the main opposition after its landmark victory in local polls and sidelining a key Erdogan rival. A number of international bodies, including European Union, have long criticized Turkey over the erosion of judicial independence as well. The government, in turn, insists that the judiciary is independent and the trials have no political aspects. When it comes to your questions about Erdogan's other potential rival, I can say that CHP's current leader Özgür Özel has been rising his profile lately. Also, one of the most strongest rival of Erdogan over the past year has seen as Ankara Mayor Mansur Yavaş. Whether one of the two, whether Özel or Yavaş would emerge as a presidential candidate, we don't know it yet, but this will be one of the issues we will closely follow next year for certainly.
I want to shift now to Israel and Gaza. The people I speak to say Israel will not accept any Turkish role in post-war Gaza. Do you think Turkey will play any role in the Palestinian enclave in 2026? Why or why not?
Well, Adam, as we mentioned, Turkey became a direct mediator in the process through its behind-the-scenes role in persuading Hamas to accept President Donald Trump's 20-point peace plan announced in October. It's working closely with Washington, Qatar, and Egypt. And since then, Ankara has also been eager to send troops to Palestinian enclave as part of the proposed International Stabilization Force, or ISF. As we know, the force would oversee Israel's phased withdrawal from Gaza, help train Palestinian security forces, and will do other things. But in the face of strong Israeli objections, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has recently recalibrated Turkey's public messaging on the force, signaling greater flexibility on the issue. Fidan said last week that Ankara's priority wasn't whether Turkey would be part of the force or not, but achieving stability in Gaza. By the way, he made those remarks just ahead of his Miami meeting with U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff alongside Qatari and Egyptian officials. In my opinion, Turkey will continue to play a role in the ceasefire process through its dialogue with Hamas and its dialogue with the Trump administration. But its inclusion in the ISF remains uncertain, I can say. Also, former and current US officials we spoke to say that Washington is also eager to involve Turkish troops within the ISF, but they are striking a cautious tone on whether they could overcome Israeli objections or not.
Finally, I want to end with something that doesn't get as much attention, but is actually quite important. And you wrote an interesting analysis recently on the Eastern Mediterranean. What were some of the significant developments in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea in 2025 that relate to Turkey?
Yeah, actually, these developments in the Eastern Mediterranean we have seen are not independent from Turkey-Israeli tensions, by the way. And as you said, 2025 marked a further hardening of blocks in the Eastern Mediterranean. The most important development came with the Lebanon-Cyprus Maritime Delimitation Agreement signed in November. Ankara views this agreement as another step in a coordinated effort to edge Turkey and Turkish Cypriots out of region's emerging energy and security architecture. And on this point, it's worth mentioning that this agreement came amid a growing strategic alignment among Greece, Cyprus, and Israel in the Eastern Mediterranean. This three-way cooperation is inseparable from the sharp deterioration in Turkish-Israeli relations since the Gaza war and Turkey's vocal criticism of Israeli actions in Gaza. As this triangle tightens, as Israel, Cyprus, and Greek cooperation grows, Syria is emerging as one of the few remaining counterweights. Analysts in Ankara now argue that a future maritime delimitation agreement with Damascus could help Turkey shift the balance of power in the region. Turkish officials I spoke to do not rule out such a possibility, but say that there is no ongoing work at present toward a potential agreement. But this is certainly will be one of the key areas we will be closely watching in 2026.
Ezgi, thanks so much for your time and your very interesting insights on all these issues. And we look forward to more of your reporting from Ankara in the new year.
Thank you so very much, Adam. And I am wishing you and all of our listeners a happy new year.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.